right, so again, we'll be in Judges chapter 9. And let's just start with verse 1 just to start setting some of the context of what's going on here in Judges 9. So in verse 1 of Judges chapter 9 it says, "Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying," and it goes on to verse 2, but let's stop right there and let's, as I said, let's kind of go back and reset the stage of who is Abimelech and who is Jerubbaal, what is going on here, and who are these people. So if you remember, Jerubbaal was the name given to Gideon after he tore down the idol or the altar to Baal that was set up in his hometown of Ophrah. And back in Judges chapter 6, verses 31 and 32, it records this event. Again, here, when you see that name, it's just mentioning Gideon, who was the previous judge that the book of Judges, the writer writes about in the book of Judges. And so Gideon, he is Abimelech's father, and Abimelech's going to be the focus of this chapter. And before we go further, let's also recall some of the things that Gideon did during his time as a judge of Israel. So back in Judges chapter 8, verses 21 and 23, to be very important because this is exactly what plays out in this chapter of Judges, where we'll see Abimelech really go against this last verse here in 23 that Gideon mentions about him not wanting to rule over the people. He's refusing to rule over them. Instead, he's telling them the Lord should be ruling over you. And so it's important here that we focus in, like, there's this reluctance that Gideon shows to rule over the people and to give in to their desire to have a human king rule over them versus having the Lord rule over them. And Gideon, he's also very specific here. He says, I'm not going to rule over you, nor will any of my descendants rule over you. So Gideon, he's wise in this aspect. He's recognizing that it's not his place to rule over God's people. Gideon had his purpose in delivering the people, but it wasn't his purpose to rule over them. The people needed to turn back to God and let God rule over them and rule over their lives. And so, kind of an interesting thing, though, that follows after this event where Gideon responds, and it's in the next verse if we were to continue reading that passage, but Gideon goes on and he asks of the people to give him some of the plunder from the Midianites after they had defeated them. And Gideon goes and he makes this golden ephod out of all the golden earrings that he had gathered from the plunder. And he sets up this golden ephod in his home area of Ophrah. And this golden ephod, if you don't know, an ephod would be something that would be worn by a high priest. And it was worn by the high priest as they would go in for divination and guidance from God. And so Gideon, he sets up this golden ephod in his home village, and it becomes a stumbling block to the people. You see, it's not totally clear whether or not Gideon set up this and created this golden ephod for it to just be a symbolic symbol, or if he had poor intentions and kind of set this up as an idol. But if you give people something to look at and worship, they will usually surely worship it. So he has this golden ephod set up in his hometown, and because it's made of gold, it's super heavy, so it can't be worn, it can't be used. And so that's what people do. They say, well, if you can't wear it and can't use it, we might as well just start worshiping this thing. And, just you look in the Israelites, anytime you make something out of gold, you've got a golden calf, well, let's worship it. So they had this golden ephod, and it becomes a stumbling block. And in Judges, it mentions that this golden ephod, it says it became a snare to Gideon and to his house. And so whether it was well-intentioned or not from Gideon, it was a mistake for him to create this image that the people would then look to and focus on for guidance, or to use as like an oracle of some sorts, rather than looking to God for guidance and looking for God to rule over them. So rather than having Gideon rule over them, they've basically turned a physical object and looked to that as being something that could rule over them. And lastly, as we get towards the end of Gideon's life, we also see some other character flaws that kind of come out after the admirable things that Gideon does. And we learn that Gideon, he has numerous children, which isn't a bad thing, but we find that he had these children from numerous wives. We also find that he had a concubine, which he had another son from, which would be Abimelech, as we'll get to here in a second. And so with all this wealth and setting up the golden ephod and all these children and wives, it seems that maybe in some sense that even though Gideon refused to rule over the people, he may have still wanted to live as a king without the responsibilities of being a king. In Judges chapter 8, verses 33 through 35, all right, so as Gideon's life wraps up, we have some 40 years that will pass between when Gideon died and when we pick up the story with Abimelech. And sure enough, it's after Gideon dies that the people, they go right back into pagan worship. They start, leaving their reliance on God and instead start relying on things of idols and the Baals and all these pagan things from the Canaanite culture that had been around them. And so what we see with this now is we get to verse 1. We start learning about Gideon's son, one of his sons, whose name is Abimelech. And what's very interesting is if you take the name Abimelech and actually look at what it means, it actually means, my father is king. And so you would think the guy who refused to be king, why would his son then be named, my father is king? And it's probably pretty likely that Gideon wasn't the one that gave Abimelech this name, my father is king. Perhaps it was a title that the people of Shechem had given to Abimelech, or that someone else had assigned to him, because it's just it wouldn't really make sense for Gideon, the guy that refused to be king, to then go and say, okay, I'm going to name my son Abimelech and give him that name, which means my father is king. But the irony is still there. Abimelech has this title, and he's claiming, this pride that he has in his father's and his own lineage with his father, who was, the guy that the Israelites had asked to be their king, though he had refused. And so Abimelech, he has this pride and this ambition, which we're going to see play out in chapter 9. All right, so let's go back now that we've done some context, and let's reread verse 1. It says, Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, and then let me do one more thing before we go on to verse 2. In Judges chapter 8, verses 30 through 31, and this all right. The thing that I want to point out here, which is kind of important, and this also ties into whether or not Gideon really was the one that gave Abimelech this name. It seems like if Gideon was the one to give Abimelech this name, which meant my father is king, he probably wouldn't have given it to the son of one of his concubines. He probably would have given it to like one of his first sons, or at least one of the sons that he had from one of his wives, versus the son that he had from a concubine. The other thing to note here, though, is that The 70 sons that he has from his wives, they're mentioned first, and then separately, Abimelech is mentioned as being a son from one of his concubines. Abimelech is counted separately from these 70 sons. And so he's already, in the sense we're seeing that he's set aside this lower status, right? He's a son of one of Gideon's concubines. He's not one of Gideon's sons from one of Gideon's wives. And it's just a thing to point out as you'll see Abimelech's ambition play out as we continue to go on through this chapter and as we get there. The other thing to point out here is that we're dealing with the area of Shechem. And Shechem was heavily influenced by Canaanite culture. It seems that when Israel came into the land and when they came to Shechem, that they didn't totally eradicate the Canaanite presence there. And so Shechem at this time would have been pretty mixed between Israeli and Canaanite culture. There likely was a lot of intermarrying between Canaanites there, and so you probably had a mixed population there. And that also is going to be a key thing that ties in, because we're going to see the ancestral ties of the people be something that kind of drives some of these ambitions. All right, so where are we at now? 10:25. All right, we got 55 verses to go. So verse 2 says, "Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all the 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and bone." All right, so here's the appeal that Abimelech is making to the Shechemites. He's saying, look, my father, Gideon, who in Abimelech's mind is, this is the guy that the Israelites wanted to make their king, so I've got this, right to the throne to be your king. I'm the guy that the Israelites can accept, but I'm also the guy that's one of your own flesh, right? I've got my mother who was a Shechemite, and so it's very likely here that Abimelech had Canaanite heritage. And so he's appealing to this mixed population of Shechem and saying, look, I've got both. I'm one of you. I've got this Canaanite heritage, but I'm also an Israelite. And my father is the guy that they wanted to make king. So he's making this pitch, I'm the guy that you should make king out of the sons of Gideon, all the sons of Gideon. I'm your best candidate that you should take, because the other sons of Gideon, they weren't of this mixed heritage, but Abimelech was. So he's making this case to them. He's like, pick me. I'm the guy that can kind of elevate our status and our influence in Israel. And so verse 3 goes on and says, "And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, and their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, 'He is our brother.' So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself." All right, so as we were saying, Abimelech, he's the son of the concubine. He's the lowest on the totem pole if someone were to try to take kingship out of Gideon's sons. And so when you're the lowest on the totem pole, the thing that you do is you just go get rid of all the competition. That's what he does here. So Abimelech, this king that the men of Shechem are going to make over themselves, it says he hires these worthless and reckless men. So this kingship already starts off on a poor note, right? He's going to take this power, and the first thing he's going to do is he goes and kills all of his half-siblings and kills Gideon's sons, because, if he's going to rise to power, he wants to make sure there's no one there to challenge him after he does this. And the other thing that's kind of interesting that we might glean about Gideon's life or Gideon's family is that he goes to Ophrah, which was Gideon's home village, to kill his sons. And so it somewhat seems that Gideon's family didn't have this huge influence after Gideon passed, because they're still living in this small city. They're not living in one of the larger cities of Israel where they might have more influence. And so this appeal to the Shechemites that Abimelech is making, it's not off to a good start. And we're going to see that their discernment, because they have their own ambitions as well, their ambitions are not in the right place. And so Abimelech, he's on this power grab, and he kills all the sons except for one of the sons, Jotham. All right, verse 6. "And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. All right, this place, this area, this terebinth tree, is actually the same place where Joshua had placed a copy of the law as a witness to the people back in Joshua chapter 24. We go back there, it says in Joshua chapter 24, verse 25, it says, "So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Then Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, 'Behold, this stone shall be a witness to us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. It shall therefore be a witness to you, lest you deny your God.'" And so these men of Shechem, they're taking Abimelech to this terebinth tree to make Abimelech their king. This is the same spot where the law had been placed to be a witness to the people. They're totally doing a 180 and rejecting the things of God and the words of God, and instead looking at their own ambitions and saying, we're going to make Abimelech our king and he's going to rule over us. Not God, but Abimelech. And, unfortunately for these people, they didn't get the memo that the events that are being recorded right now were going to be for the book of Judges and not actually for the book of Kings. So they're about 150 years early on seeking out a king. But nevertheless, let's go on. Verse 7 says, "Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out. And he said to them, 'Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you.'" All right, so Jotham comes back onto the scene now, and he's going to give them this message from the Lord. And Sean, if you could pull up the map of Israel, just to give us some context on where these things are happening. In the middle there where you see that green text, it's a little bit hard to see, but that green label there is Shechem. See if I can zoom in on this a little bit. There we go. All right. So there's Shechem, that green label there, and it's right in between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. It's nested right there in that valley. If you're curious where Ophrah is, which was Gideon's home village, that's kind of up here, a little bit north of where you see Mount Gilboa. So it's about 25-mile distance. But our story here is taking place in Shechem. And Sean, if you go to that next image, this next image is actually pretty cool because it shows kind of a view of Shechem. So you have Shechem right dead center in the middle there. And then on the left and right, you've got Mount Gerizim on the left, Mount Ebal on the right. And so it's just nested right in this valley. And in our story, we see that Jotham, he's speaking to them from Mount Gerizim. And so the geography of this location actually forms kind of a natural amphitheater where Jotham could speak from Mount Gerizim, and the people could actually hear him down in Shechem pretty easily. The distance between these two mountains is about a mile in between them, that distance there. And so we see this area actually, if we look back in Scripture, we actually see that this area was used also for pronouncing things. If we go to back to Joshua chapter 8, verses 32 to 35, we'll see an instance I believe I might have this backwards, but as he would read the blessings, the people on Mount Gerizim would say amen. And as he would read the curses, the other half that was on Mount Ebal, they would say amen. And so they were using this spot in Shechem to read, and both sides could hear, and both sides could respond. And so we see that this location is not new to this idea of being able to speak and for the people to hear, due to the way that the mountains and Shechem was in the valley between them. All right, so what does Jotham say to the disobedient men of Shechem? Well, he gives this parable, and this is the first parable that we have recorded in the Bible. So in verse 8, he says, "The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over the trees?' And then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over the trees?' Then the tree said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'" All right, so in this parable, we've got 5 characters. We've got the trees, which are looking for a king. They represent the people, or the men of Shechem, who are seeking this king. And next we have the olive tree. And the olive tree is the first that the trees go to ask to rule over them. And the olive tree, it was already producing oil which honored God. And if we think about what olive oil was used for, it was often used for anointing the priest and fueling the lamp that illuminated the sanctuary. And next they get to the fig tree, because the olive tree denies. The fig tree, it was producing good fruit. And it was a staple in the agriculture there. The fig tree represented often blessing and safety and security for people in the land. And the fig tree refuses. And so next you get to the vine. The vine, it's producing good wine. And the wine, it brought joy. And so all of these refuse to be king, to rule over the people, or rule over the trees. And the thing to note about is that they were all qualified in this parable to rule over the trees. Each one of them was producing something good. But the reason that they were refusing, if we think about this parable, the reason they refused is because it wasn't their place to stop doing what they were doing that was good, that they were producing. And instead it was better for them to continue to do that rather than to look to having men that they could rule over, and men to really seek them as like, we're going to put our faith and our trust in you. And so it's the same thing in ministry or even just our Christian walk, right? There might be something that you're doing good and serving, and that's what the Lord has set you out to do. Each one of us, like each one of these trees, has its own unique purpose and gift that God has given us to serve Him. And when something comes along that kind of tickles our ambitions, and it's like, hey, look, you can come be king over us. Why don't you do that? It's like, it's our place to recognize, God has given me this ministry or this gift to serve, and it's better for me to continue in that versus just going after something that might feed my own ambitions or my own selfishness. And so the trees, they were wise to recognize their place. The trees being the olive tree, fig tree, and the vine here, not the trees that were looking for a ruler. And so the trees representing the people of Shechem, when all of these qualified candidates decline, they continue to go after their own ambition to have someone to rule over them instead of having someone worthy rule over them. And so they go and they ask the bramble. And the bramble was not qualified at all to be a ruler over them. The people's discernment, or the tree's discernment, was so misguided that they didn't care who it was. They just wanted someone to rule over them. Essentially anyone but God. They just wanted a king. And that was a lot of times what happened in Israel. Is all of the Canaanite cultures and the Philistines, all of them, they had kings, and they wanted to be like the other nations, say, oh, well, we want a king for ourselves. And so the bramble, it was a nuisance in the land. And Sean, if you bring that picture up of the bramble, please. It grows low to the ground. This is a picture of a bramble. And if you remember in that passage, he says, the bramble says, come to me and I'll offer you shelter and shade. And this really is not a plant that could offer shade, because even if you were to get in like this area over here, you kind of say, oh, it's a little bit dark. You really can't get in there, because down here you kind of can see that the bramble, it was just this dry and thorny bush. It couldn't offer any shelter or shade or protection. So the bramble is just making this false claim, saying, hey, look, I'll rule over you. I'll give you all these things, and making all these empty promises that it really can't offer. The other thing that was a thing to note about the bramble is that because it was so dry, it easily caught fire. So it was a nuisance in the sense that if you had bramble laying around and next to the trees and other agriculture, if the bramble caught fire, then put everything else around it at risk, because that would catch fire also. And so it's a lack of discernment that the people had, right? They didn't care who was going to rule over them. If they had any discernment, they would have seen that, hey, bramble is actually like not going to work out well for us because it catch fire and we'll be at risk too. But it's that judgment that they've taken their eyes off of God so much, and they just want to fulfill their own desires. We want a king, so we'll get a king, whether it has consequences or not. And so, the important thing is as we look at our own lives, and we mentioned this earlier, it's we want to lay aside our own fleshly and selfish ambitions in our life. Throughout our life, the warning of this parable is that if we focus on our own pride and ego and our ambitions, we're going to reap the consequences of that. And that's what we'll see the people do here as this parable plays out, and we see how the parable relates to the men of Shechem and also to Abimelech. But in this case, the warning here is that if you're just seeking out after your ego and your pride and your ambitions and not reflect on what God wants, it's just going to lead to your destruction. And this can happen, not just in your Christian walk, but if we're thinking about how we can live as Christians and walk the way that God would want us, even in our lives of like in work, because no matter what we do, even if it's not here at church, at work you have opportunity to be a witness to people, to show how you carry yourself and conduct yourselves. And so, the workplace, this happens a lot where you see people, they will just start, undermining each other because it's just, I want to get to the next level, so who can I throw under the bus to elevate myself? It's kind of what Abimelech did with his brothers. He said, I want to be the top, so let me get rid of the brothers and I'll be the next in line. And this fire that we're going to see, the bramble devours the things around it, but then it also gets devoured by the fire as well. And so if that's how we're living our lives, where we're just chasing after our own ambitions, yeah, you might initially see that it's affecting the people around you. Think, oh, well, this is working out for me. I'm getting ahead. Well, that's going to come back, and that fire will eventually catch you as well. And so that's the warning here of this parable. And so Jotham continues in verse 16, and he says, "Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves," which clearly they didn't. Verse 17, "For my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian, but you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you." So he's saying, look, if this is a good thing that you're doing, then, rejoice, be happy about this. Let this be a good thing for you. But he's already making this point. He's kind of speaking rhetorically here, and again, kind of hinting at, insulting their judgment, their discernment, because he knows that they haven't done this in good faith and are not acting in the right mind. So he goes on in verse 20, he says, "But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech." And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for fear of Abimelech his brother. All right, so it's like we said, Abimelech representing this bramble in the parable, he is going to be like a fire to the people. And likewise, the people are going to be like a fire to Abimelech. It was going to lead to their mutual destruction. This thing that they thought was good and that was in their own interest, their own best interest, it really wasn't. And these selfish ambitions were going to come back to bite them. It was going to lead to their mutual destruction. And so Jotham, he's given this prophetic warning at this time now. And the men of Shechem probably weren't really thrilled to hear, and that's probably why we see Jotham, he, from his vantage point, from his positioning on Mount Gerizim, he probably was at a safe distance to run away and flee after this, because he figured, hey, I'm going to make this pronouncement. I'm one of the guys that was supposed to be dead already, so I'm going to proclaim this message, and then I'm going to get out of here for my own safety. And some of the things that Jotham says, though, he he not only is mocking the men of Shechem, but if you go back and you read, he's mocking Abimelech in a sense because he points out that in verse 18 he says, he points out that Abimelech is the son of his female servant, meaning Gideon's female servant. And so he's actually even almost like lessening the status of Abimelech's mother to not being just a concubine, but also just a servant. And so he's saying like, look, this is the guy that you're going to make king over you. And he goes on and points out just these wrongful actions and explains, there's going to be consequences to these actions because, you're not doing this by following God's will, but in fact, you're following your own will. And so the warning here, it's clear from God to not follow some person just because they come and they make this nice appeal, which is what the Shechemites thought. They said, oh, this guy is one of us. He can elevate us in Israel. We've got this mixed population, so we've got this guy that kind of can help us, elevate ourselves. And so the people, they're just following after their own will. And so after Jotham delivers this prophecy about this upcoming judgment, he gets out of there. And the one thing that, Jotham does do, though, like he's brave enough to give this message, right? Jotham is not afraid to come and tell the people what they're doing was wrong and that there was going to be consequences. Whereas he could very easily said, hey, if I go there, like these people try to kill me, why should I go there and risk my life? Because they're probably going to try to kill me again. But Jotham, he's faithful to God. He goes and proclaims this message, proclaims this parable and prophecy to the people about, consequences of their actions that were going to come. And he does kind of get the nice bargain of being able to like give the message and leave versus giving the message and staying to see it. Whereas you think about some of the other judges, a lot of times they were given, hey, you're going to go into battle. I'm going to be with you in the battle. So you're actually going to not just say what we're going to do, but you're going to go into battle and fight. And so Jotham, he gets maybe a little bit of an easier ministry task from the Lord where he's able to just get on out of there. And if we keep going, what do we find happens after Jotham gives this message? Well, in verse 22, it says, after Abimelech had reigned over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided in the killing of his brothers. Okay, so 3 years pass after Jotham gives this message to the men of Shechem, gives this warning, and so far we don't see any consequences have played out for them. Abimelech is still ruling. He's been ruling for 3 years. But in verse 23, it tells us that God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the people of Shechem. And so what's happening here, right? You've got these people who Abimelech has their own selfish ambitions and pride to rule over the people. You have the men of Shechem who have their own selfish ambitions of having a king from one of their own people be king in Israel. And so you've got all these things at play, and they were ripe for God to allow the spirit of ill will to grow between them, because their ambitions for each one of them, Abimelech and the people, their ambitions were actually going to start to conflict with one another. And that wickedness in their hearts was going to amplify, and ultimately was going to lead to their destruction. So this thing that these people thought, we're going to use this for our own gain, and this wickedness that they had, that wickedness is actually going to turn on them, and God is just going to let it play out and essentially let their wickedness grow till it leads to their own destruction. And God, what's interesting about this chapter, if you read about the book of Judges, a lot of times God delivers the people by sending the judge, and they go into battle and they fight the enemy. And here, God's going to deal with the enemy and the wickedness just by letting it self-destruct on its own. So verse 25, it says, and the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way, and it was told Abimelech. So the men of Shechem, after 3 years, the spirit of ill will has come, and the men of Shechem are starting to plot against Abimelech. So what they're doing is they're ambushing people who are coming into Shechem along the passageways. And by ambushing the people, what they're doing is they're cutting off Abimelech's power by hitting his pocketbooks, right? The people who are coming in that normally Abimelech would be able to extract duties from them, and where trade would come in and out. These people can no longer safely go through Shechem or get to Shechem without being ambushed. And so people naturally are going to start avoiding Shechem, going around it. And so Abimelech, he's going to be cut off financially. And with that, it's going to mean he's not going to be able to deliver on some of the things that a king would normally deliver, which is safety and prosperity to the people. And so in verse 26, we see what happens as all of these things start to unfold. In verse 26, it says, "Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards, and trod them and made merry. And they went to the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech." So Gaal, this person, comes in and says, Abimelech can't rule over you guys as king. He's not doing his job. I'll take his place. And the people say, that's great. We'll put our confidence in you. Not surprising, because these are the people that take anyone as king. And so we see that they're obviously pretty confident, because they're going out in their fields and they're not afraid of anything happening to them, and they're out there cursing Abimelech, it says. And so Gaal is coming in here, and he's trying to step in and usurp power from Abimelech. And verse 28 goes on and says, "Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, 'Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him, Abimelech? And if only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech.' So he said to Abimelech, 'Increase your army and come out.'" All right, so ironically, Gaal makes an appeal to the people for him to be the one in power over them. And ironically, he does this very similar to the appeal that Abimelech made to the people. Abimelech relied on his Israeli lineage and his father being Gideon as a point for the Shechemites to make him king. And what Gaal does is he appeals to the other side of the Shechemites' lineage, which was through his Canaanite heritage. And he's basically saying, look, Abimelech, he's not providing you safety and protection as a king. We should serve me. Serve me. I'm from our Canaanite heritage. If we go back to our Canaanite ancestors, that's who we should be looking to for someone that's going to be a king. And so he makes this appeal, but he appeals to the opposite side of this the lineage of this mixed population here in Shechem. And so in verse 30, it goes on, says, "When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, 'Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are fortifying the city against you. Now therefore get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity.'" All right, so while Gaal, he's trying to gain support and traction and allegiance of the people in Shechem, Zebul, who was the ruler of the city in Shechem, he sends this warning to Abimelech, says, "Hey, here's what's going on. The people are starting to plot against you. You need to do something about this." And so, interestingly, and this maybe had a role in why the people were so quick to abandon Abimelech too, is that it seems that Abimelech might not have been living in Shechem, because it says Zebul went to him. And if Abimelech was in the city, he obviously would have seen all of these things starting to grow and fester. And so Abimelech's absence from the city of Shechem, perhaps he was living somewhere nearby, it seems like that also would have been a sign for the people to say, well, hey, if he's not even here, why would we have him as our king versus someone who is here and is willing to kind of be in it with us, which is Gaal. And so Zebul, we start to see here, he kind of plays this double agent role where he's feeding information to Abimelech and also kind of helping Abimelech by being there in Shechem to give Abimelech some advantage. And so in verse 34 it says, "So Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal the son of Ebed went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, 'Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains.' But Zebul said to him, 'You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men.'" All right, so Abimelech, he's got his 4 companies, and he's starting to come against the city of Shechem. Zebul, who's there kind of acting as a double agent for Abimelech, he's there in Shechem with Gaal, who's trying to lead this rebellion and an uprising and take over power from Abimelech. Zebul is there, and as Abimelech is kind of getting into position with some of his companies come against the city. And Gaul sees what he thinks are people coming down from the mountains for an attack. And he says, look, there's people coming down. And he's basically saying, like, we need to get ready. Something's about to happen. And Zebul here is kind of just delaying him, basically just gaslighting him and saying, like, look, those are just shadows. Like, those aren't people. Don't worry about it. You're kind of, you're losing your mind. And so Zebul, he's just doing this long enough to try to buy time for Abimelech. And so verse 37 keeps going and says, so Gaul spoke again and said, see, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree. Then Zebul said to him, where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now. So Gaul went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. All right, so obviously, as Abimelech's companies got closer, Zebul wasn't able to continue to basically delay. They would have gotten close enough to where Zebul or Gaul would have said, like, okay, yeah, these clearly are men coming against me, and I've got to do something. And if we remember the picture where we have Shechem down in the valley between these mountains, Shechem, it doesn't seem like they had a very good stronghold for defense. And so as Abimelech's men are coming down the mountain, they've got a good vantage point. They've got the high ground coming in. And Gaul and the men of Shechem, they're kind of just sitting there and really had no other option but to go out and to fight against Abimelech rather than trying to sit there like sitting ducks and wait for them to come to them. So we see that they go out to battle, and what happens in verse 40, it says, and Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaul and his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech, told him that Zebul had driven out Gaul from Shechem. That's what he's telling them. And he says, so he took his place and divided them into 3 companies and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. All right, so as the battle continues, we see Gaul is able to drive out Zebul is able to drive out Gaul from the city, and so Abimelech needs to go back in, and he's going to finish demolishing Shechem, and he's going to kill all the people. And this phrase here that says at the end of verse 45 says that he sowed it with salt. This shows the level of destruction that had occurred, right? If you sow soil with salt, it becomes infertile, it can't grow anything. It's no longer useful. And so we see the extent at which this destruction occurred. Abimelech went in and he left nothing there. He killed everyone within the city of Shechem. And we know that historically this is backed up because it's not going to be about another 200 years before Shechem is rebuilt. And that's recorded in 1 Kings chapter 12, where King Jeroboam is the one that actually goes and he rebuilds Shechem after all this time. So this was a complete destruction of the city of Shechem. And now we're kind of seeing how Abimelech, like the bramble, he's caught fire, and the people are facing consequences. This fire from the bramble is now taking place on the men of Shechem and on this city, and it's totally destroyed. And verse 46 goes on and says, now when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, what you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done. So each of the peoples likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech. Put them against the stronghold and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. All right, so Abimelech, these people, they've gone into this tower thinking that it'll provide them refuge and protection from Abimelech as he's coming to attack. And Abimelech, it says he cuts down these boughs from the tree. The bough would have been like a main branch of the tree. And so Abimelech, he cuts down the bough, tells all the people with him, you also cut down for yourself a bough. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay all of these branches, these big branches against the tower. I'm going to light them on fire to destroy the tower and destroy the people from within, right? If you create the fire on the tower, there's no way for them to get out. They're stuck. And so that's his plan to defeat the people, and it's successful. And so after Abimelech is successful in defeating the tower at Shechem, he then goes on to Thebez, which we'll read here in a second. And Thebez is going to be about 10 miles northeast of Shechem. So in verse 50 it says, "Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it. And he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire." All right, so it's kind of the same thing. He goes to this new city, Thebez, which is, again, I said 10 miles northeast, and the people are fleeing, and kind of the same thing. They go into this tower for protection, which if I had heard what had just happened in Shechem, I probably would not be looking to go into a tower, because we saw how it played out for the people in Shechem when they did. And Abimelech, probably thinking that this worked out so well in Shechem with the tower in Shechem, is thinking, I'm going to do the same thing in Thebez. I'm going to go to this tower. We're going to lay the boughs against the tower. We're going to light them on fire, and that's how we're going to defeat the people here. And so it's this pride of Abimelech, because there is actually some discernment that Abimelech should have had, which is, when you get close to a tower, you're making yourself vulnerable. If anything, you would think Abimelech, send your men to go do it, and you can kind of sit back and, have some protection rather than you being up in the battle and up close. And so how does this play out? Well, in verse 53 it says, "But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull." Remember, Abimelech, he's real close to the tower because they're trying to lay these boughs against the tower, and so he's right there for this woman to drop this millstone. And in verse 54 it says, "Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, 'Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him.' So his young man thrust him through, and he died." All right, so this whole strategy that he employed previously, without taking much discernment, he employs it again, and it leads to his downfall, because this woman drops an upper millstone on him. And unfortunately for him, we see that he didn't want people to recall that it was a woman that killed him, but as we're reading here today, it was a woman that killed him. His pride, now we're seeing like the fulfillment of this prophecy. Abimelech was the fire to the men of Shechem, and now it has been completed with Joshua's prophecy, where the men of Shechem had now become a fire to Abimelech, and that mutual destruction has occurred. I was digging, and I actually found footage, believe it or not, of this event. Here it is. Yeah. This is how it played out exactly. There's Abimelech, and there's the millstone that fell. Yeah, it's sad. That's ancient footage right there. So Abimelech's pride, right? It got the best of him. His ambition, the men of Shechem, their ambition, they weren't looking after God's will, like we've said many times. And whether or not and probably not recognizing, because they were so caught up with their own ambitions, they didn't stop to think, how is this going to actually play out for us? Because we're not looking to see what God's will is, but we just are after our own interest, right? We mentioned that Abimelech, he didn't want to be known as being killed by this woman, and actually even in 2 Samuel chapter 11 verses 20 and 21, it's referenced here that he was killed by a woman when Joab is giving a message to his messenger to take back to King David. And it says there, "If it happens that the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, 'Why did you approach near to the city when you fought? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Was it not a woman who cast a piece of millstone on him from the wall, so that he died in Thebez? Why did you go near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also.'" So here, Joab is basically saying, like, look, we're going to explain. The king is probably going to say, well, why did you get close to the tower? Why did you get close? That's vulnerable. You remember, that's how Abimelech died, by getting so close. And King David, though, Joab is kind of sending this secret message back through this messenger to King David, because King David wanted Uriah up close to be killed. So Joab is kind of sending this message secretly back to the messenger, without the messenger realizing that what really was going on here was that David was setting up Uriah to die, and that was the message that needs to be sent back was that, yeah, Uriah did die. Our plan to get him close to up front in the battle made him vulnerable to be killed, and he was killed. So kind of an interesting thing to note, but there you even see, like, it was at least common knowledge in battle that you wouldn't draw this close to the tower or to the battle lines right in front. But Abimelech, he's just going off his own pride and his own ambitions, and they clouded his judgment and his discernment. And so another thing that's kind of ironic here with Abimelech is that the 70 sons of Gideon, his brothers that he killed them all on a single stone. And here we see that's a single stone that the woman drops that kills him. And so whether or not that's God kind of in play, kind of making using this as a bit of irony to Abimelech's initial rebellion and his wicked acts, very well could be something that God was kind of using, like, you killed the 70 sons on a single stone, and that's how you will be killed as a consequence of these wicked actions that you've done. And so we've gone through now, we've completed, and we've seen how the mutual destruction of these people has played out for following their own ambitions. And verse 55 it says, "And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man to his place. Thus God had repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers." It's God that repaid the wickedness. And all the evil of the men of Shechem, God returned on their own heads. And on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. All right, so as we just wrap up this passage and think about some points here, the first thing is, we can't let our pride and our ambition cause us to put our own desires before God's desires. This is exactly what Abimelech did when he wanted to be king. It was all about Abimelech. It wasn't about what God wants or what was right for God. If you think about the parable, right, the trees that were doing good things, they were wise enough to recognize, I'm doing something good. I'm producing something good. I shouldn't leave that to go follow my own ambitions. And the second point is, don't go kill your siblings, especially if you have more than, some of us probably grew up with. I had 4. That was enough. You might be tempted if you had 70, but yeah, don't go kill your siblings. But no, really, if we think about this in our senses, don't go sabotaging other people, right? Just because you want to elevate yourself doesn't mean you should, go and gossip about people. Maybe in this kind of ministry, people think, oh, this person is, doing so well in ministry, but I know something about them that, I can make something up or gossip about them to undermine them and undermine their character. It's not like, it doesn't even have to be a scandal. We're all humans. We all sin. We all make mistakes. So it's easy to find something on someone and say, oh, so-and-so, they slipped up and did this and I caught them. And now we're going to amplify it and undermine them. And be doing it because you want your own gain, right? If I can take them out, I can elevate myself. And when you're doing that, all you're doing is you're seeking your own glory. You're trying to steal what you think is glory that someone else has. You say, hey, I want that for myself. And that's what Abimelech was doing here. I wanted to be king. He's like, I've got a way to do it with my father being a respected person in Israel, and the Shechemites being vulnerable to accepting me because I'm one of them. And then lastly, the other thing is, we need to, when we're seeking, just as humans, we're going to be seeking things to either rule over us, whether it's a person or a thing. And a lot of times we are like the people of Shechem, and we're just saying, well, whatever it is, I just want something to take up the time of my life, to occupy myself. Anything but God usually. If you think about your lives, it's easy to get obsessed or hyper-focused on a certain thing, and you kind of, if you stop right now, actually think, like, there might be something in your life right now that you're just hyper-focused on. You're like, hey, I'm actually way more focused on this thing, and I'm recognizing now that this thing is actually drawing my attention away from God, or taking time away from God that I normally would have. And so it's easy for us to unknowingly place something and have it reign over our lives. And that's where that we need to stop and think and be in God's word and follow God, so that way we can stop and recognize, has our judgment or our discernment become clouded like the people of Shechem's judgment and discernment had become clouded. We'll leave with a couple verses, because as we're looking for, why should God be the one that reigns over our life, right? If we look at Proverbs 18:10, it says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The people that went into the tower at Shechem, they went there for safety, and it couldn't provide them safety. The Lord, though, he is a strong tower for us. He is the one that can provide safety to us. He's the one that actually can rule over us and protect us and provide for us. And likewise, God, he's given us Jesus, who can be the king over our lives. And Jesus, what he said in John chapter 10, verse 11, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Jesus, God, Jesus doesn't want to just rule over our lives, just have the gratification of, hey, I've got these people to rule over, and now they're serving me, which is basically what Abimelech wanted. He just wanted, hey, I want the power. I want to rule over these people and have that gratification. Jesus doesn't rule over us because he wants that gratification of us, being his servants. Jesus does that because he loves us, right? And he wants to redeem us, and that's why in John chapter 10, verse 11, it says that Jesus, even though he's ruling over us, he gave his life for us, right? He wants to rule over us because he has our best interest at heart. He wants to rule over us because he knows that he's the only one that can redeem us, and he loves us, and he wants to be able to redeem us. And so that's the thing I want to end with here, is that we need to place someone to rule over our lives, and it really needs to be Jesus. Jesus is the one that needs to rule over our lives because he's the only one that can save us, provide for us. He can eternally redeem us. He's the only one that can do that. And we need him to do that because we have all sinned, and we all have the consequences of our sins, and those consequences of sin need to be paid for, and Jesus took it upon himself to pay for those. But we have to make him the ruler of our life to do that. And for a lot of us here, we probably have already made Jesus the ruler of our life. And for those of us, and this is me included, we need to make sure that we're treating Jesus like he's the ruler of our life. If we stop and reflect, are we treating Jesus as the ruler of our life and serving him, or are we kind of sliding to a place where we're just doing it by name and saying, oh yeah, Jesus rules in my life, but then the things that I'm doing throughout the week don't reflect that at all. And so if that's you, just reflect on, how do people around me see you? And this is a good litmus test of how are you doing? If you're in the workplace or out with friends, stuff like that, can people look at you and say, Jesus rules in that person's life, right? Can they see that you are aligned with God and serving him and trusting in him? And is that something that's evident to the people around you that maybe do or don't know that you are a Christian, right? They should see that just naturally come out of you and be able to recognize that. If you have people around you that, if you said, hey, I go to church on Sunday, like, oh, really? You go to church? I didn't know that. Like, something's probably wrong then. And you might be in a situation where you might be saying, like, hey, Jesus is ruler of my life, but not actually showing and exhibiting it. That obedience to God should come out naturally, and actually it should be even more so noticeable in our society today because we're going so far away from God that it's becoming harder and harder to be a Christian and actually serve God and let him rule in your life without people being able to see it. And so that's the challenge that I have for us, is to make sure that we're putting God first. We're checking maybe our discernment, our judgment has become clouded on certain things, and we go and we look back and we say, okay, actually now I look back, these things, I am not putting God first, or I have had clouded judgment. I'm putting something else above God, and I need to rectify those things. And so next time I teach, we'll go through Judges 10, and we'll continue on, and we'll get to the next judge, Jephthah, and some of the minor judges before him. But that's it for today. So let's go ahead and pray. Lord, we thank you for this message today. We pray that we would be able to kind of put up a mirror and not just read this and see that, oh, these are wicked people and they did these wrong things, and I know that I surely won't do those things. I pray that we would put up a mirror to ourselves and say, what are the things in this passage, the flaws that Abimelech or the men of Shechem, what are the flaws that they exhibited that I can find in my life? They may not be as extreme, Lord, but certainly we can all find flaws there to some extent, Lord. And I pray that you'd help us identify those things so that we can deal with them, that we can draw closer to you after dealing with them, and that we'd be able to remove those things so that we can elevate you in our lives to give you the glory, to let you rule over our lives as you deserve. So we ask for that. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Jesus ready stands to save.